Was Silent Hill Homecoming really that bad? Based off several articles I read and word of mouth, Homecoming is considered by many to be one of, if not the worst games in this horror series, and I'm here to give my 2 cents and answer this question. I would like to note that at the time of my writing this, my only other experience in the Silent Hill series was the first couple hours of Downpour, and Homecoming is the superior title in my opinion. Some might say I'm not qualified to make this video due to my lack of experience in the franchise, but I say just the opposite, as I was able to see this game with next to no bias due to not really playing other games in the series, and this allowed me to see Homecoming for what it is without comparing it to the other titles. With that being said, while I wouldn't call this a good game, it's not an awful game either, although it definitely has its flaws. I'll start things off on a positive note and discuss one of the things this game did right, and that is environments and horror elements. This game could be quite unsettling at times, with eerie sound effects, mutilated corpses just lying around, very creepy enemy and boss designs, especially the second and final bosses, sometimes hearing an enemy but not knowing where they were and having to constantly look over your shoulder, and the mixed bag that is tough enemies throughout the game. This title has a lot to offer as far as selling its horror effects. Not the scariest game I've ever played, that'd probably go to Vincent Lade's Jawbreaker, but this title was able to stand on its own two legs as far as the horror effects go. Okay, my biggest positives out of the way, let's move on to a negative. Performance. I played Homecoming on a Xbox 360, and it had more than its fair share of issues, with lag being the most common and probably input issues after that. Now, it wasn't laggy all the time like, I don't know, Shadow of Mordor on the 360, but every now and then, usually in combat, you'd notice a significant drop in frame rate, and on one occasion I even remember firing a gun and it didn't shoot, so I had to pull the trigger a second time to let off a single round. Other input issues included things like I'd hold my joystick, say, to the left and hit B to dive, and Alex, your character, would dive to the right, or forwards, or even backwards. Now, this was an uncommon issue, but it happened enough times that I feel it's worth mentioning. Curious to any PS3 or PC players watching this, did you encounter any input issues like this? And combat seemed to have some performance issues outside of just being super clunky, but more on that soon. I specifically remember one part in the very last level while fighting a member of the Order. I plunged the ceremonial dagger through the middle of his head, and he didn't take any damage. And other times, I'd very clearly hit an enemy with an attack, and it didn't register. And it happened vice versa on one occasion, where I clearly got hit and the game didn't register it, although I'm not complaining about that one. I also recall towards the end of the game on one level where you had to place 5 stone tablets on a display in a certain order, and I did what I thought to be the correct order, but the game said no. Confused, I began to rearrange the tablets until I eventually came back to my first arrangement, and on the second attempt, it worked. There are more glitches and various little bugs I remember, but in a nutshell, Homecoming gets a C- on performance. Okay, onto the story. I'm honestly somewhat lost as to what I should say here. It had its good points, sure, but overall, I can't say I followed it completely or fully understood it, and the fact that this title has 5 different endings, none of which were ever officially canonized, doesn't help. I myself got ending number 4, although the happy ending would be the most likely to be the canon one if I had to guess. Note here, I went on YouTube after beating the game and watched all the other endings. But back to the story, I wanted to kind of get a clearer idea as to what all happened, so I went to YouTube and searched Silent Hill Homecoming Story Explained, and got zilch. Nothing meeting that description. Although I did read the Wikipedia page, which is maybe accurate, I read a couple places where this game received criticism for its vague, confusing, and sometimes poorly written story, and while it had some good moments, sure, it also had a lot of eyebrow-raising moments. Spoiler alerts ahead. One of my larger issues with this story was it just took forever to pick up any traction, and wasn't until maybe at the halfway point did it feel like I had made any significant progress. It was definitely rather slow getting to things, and some things just didn't make sense. The whole game, Alex somehow forgot that his younger brother Joshua is dead and spends 95% of the game trying to find him, only to remember at the very tail end of the game that Josh is dead. Like, how do you forget something like that? Or you learn Alex's dad went to Silent Hill to look for Josh, but Josh was dead? What? I could be mistaken about this one, as I said, I didn't 100% follow the story, or when Alex's mother died. Was it sad? Yes, death is sad, but it felt like the game was trying to make us feel emotionally torn over a woman we knew almost nothing about, and had no real connection to, in addition to the death of Alex's father being very easily avoidable, but plot armor there. And there were also hints that the whole game was just a hallucination by Alex, and that he was never actually in the military, but a mental ward. But only one ending seems to solidify that, and his experience with firearms hints that he did actually serve. Honestly, it's really hard to say what the story of this game is, as again, none of the endings were ever officially canonized, and after reading some YouTube comments, no one really seems to fully agree on the story, making a recap rather challenging. Okay, on to combat. Oh boy. I believe I'll discuss boss fights first. This game has 4 or 5 boss fights, depending on if you consider the dude with a buzzsaw a boss or not, and they were overall pretty enjoyable, although the second boss, Scarlet, kicked my butt countless times and I found her to be the hardest boss, in addition to having a very freakish design. After barely scraping by her by the skin of my teeth after maybe half a dozen attempts, I expected the following bosses to be nightmares to beat. But nope, I defeated the following bosses in a single attempt. Not sure if this was intentional or not. Maybe the devs just wanted a early game speed bump or something like that. Who knows? But overall, boss fights get a B plus from me. Okay, normal enemies. This game had a fair amount of enemy variety, maybe 8 to 10 enemy types off the top of my head. You had freak show nurses with knives, skinless hounds being one of the few enemies you can't outrun, pipe and gun wielding order members, some freakazoid human mechanical spider hybrid thingamajig, just to name a few, with probably the acid breath spewing smog being my least favorite of the bunch. So for combat, you have firearms and melee weapons, with gun ammo being kinda scarce, but works about how you'd expect. Point and shoot. Okay, not much to that, although the rifle could only hold a maximum of 15 rounds for whatever reason. But melee combat is rather, broken? Clunky? Akin to someone waddling to the toilet after consuming $30 worth of Taco Bell? Yeah, that's probably the best way to describe it. Before I actually discuss melee combat itself, it wasn't until I was maybe 60 to 70% of the way through the game until I discovered the best combat strategy. Simply don't engage in combat and run away from everything. Enemies never drop loot, and it's often just not worth the risk unless you absolutely have to engage in a fight, and I recorded my footage before I made this discovery. But sometimes you gotta raise your fist and put up a fight. And when that happens in this game, oh dear. Oh dee hee here. The combat in this game feels broken and just stupid hard at times. You have 5, I think, melee weapons in this game. The combat knife, its upgraded form, the ceremonial dagger, which seems to have no damage boost, but has a light combo where the knife didn't, I think. You had a lead pipe and its upgraded version, the crowbar, where the only difference seems to be cosmetic, and finally the fire axe. One thing that felt odd is all 5 weapons seemingly do the exact same damage, the exact same attack range, and have the exact same speed, excluding the dagger's light 3-hit combo, so you basically have 5 identical weapons, which just felt silly. I don't know, maybe I'm mistaken, and maybe the axe does like 1% more damage than the other weapons or something like that, but they all largely felt the same. The combat itself, with your set of near identical weapons, feels like if you took Arkham Asylum, took away the warnings that an enemy was about to hit you, added a bit of lag, some bad camera angles in tight spaces, and sprained both of Batman's ankles and took away his gadgets. That's one of the best ways to look at it, probably. Let's see here. You need pretty good reflexes and good hand-eye coordination to make timely dodges and counterattacks, although you'd often dodge seemingly in a timely manner and get hit anyways. Or you'd seemingly launch a counterattack in a timely manner, but your enemy would just ignore it and take another swing at you. Lovely. On the second to last level, I did sort of figure out how to stun lock some enemies with the dagger's light combo, but it was tedious and only worked in a 1v1 encounter. From what I understand and read, the combat of Silent Hill is intentionally really clunky because A, in most games you play as normal people with no real combat training, and B, the idea is that every enemy is a legitimate threat that can deal heavy damage or kill the player with relative ease, so combat is best to be avoided. But this doesn't make sense to me for a couple reasons. Discussing A, while in most SH games you are just a normal person with no combat experience, but in Homecoming your character has military training, which last I checked includes martial arts and at least some degree of melee combat training, so that excuse doesn't work here. And B, why would you intentionally make clunky combat so the player wants to avoid combat? Please note I keep saying clunky and not hard. There is a difference. I don't mind hard enemies. Shoot, Zombi is one of my favorite horror games, and The Last Faith was my 2023 Game of the Year, in addition to really enjoying Alice Madness Returns on the max difficulty. And in all these games, every enemy is a legitimate threat to the player pretty much, but the combat feels smooth and doesn't actively discourage the player from taking on an unnecessary fight. And if you want players to avoid combat and focus just on the story and horror elements, why even add combat? Just make a horror game like Slender the Arrival or Made of Skur, where you focus only on the story and the atmosphere with pretty much no combat in either game, not counting Made of Skur's challenge mode. So, Silent Hill Homecoming gets a D- for combat outside of boss fights. Combine that with a B+ for boss fights, and combat overall earns a C. Onto a mixed bag topic, the save system. I wasn't a huge fan of it. Save points, while looking cool, are spread out rather thin in the first 60% of the game, and on one occasion I wanted to take a break and go play something else, and ended up having to drag myself around for another 45-ish minutes searching for a save spot. I can't say that helped my experience. I mean, sure, I understand why save points are stretched out, but that doesn't mean I like it. And also, if you want to load your save while playing, maybe if you did something stupid and want to go back, you have to exit the game, go to the main menu, then reload your game from there. This title could have benefited from a load last save option from the pause menu. Okay, for the last thing I want to brush up on in my video, the awful puzzles. I don't mind a bunch of puzzles in a puzzle game, or in a game that's marketed as having a bunch of puzzles. but Homecoming is neither a puzzle game or a game that was marketed as having a bunch of tough puzzles. For those who don't know, I cannot stand a bunch of puzzles in a non-puzzle game. Why? Because I don't like puzzles. I came here for a horror game, not a puzzle horror game. If I wanted a puzzle horror game, I would have played one and reinstalled Poppy Playtime on my PC and not played this game. Now, some of the puzzles weren't too bad, and even my 57 IQ brain could figure them out, but some puzzles were just excessive. Like the fuse box puzzles or this one you see on screen. I fiddled around with it for about half an hour, then my wife, who likes puzzles, took a crack at it, and she couldn't figure it out. Or the puzzle before the final boss, which just completely flabbergasted me and made absolutely zero sense whatsoever. I just don't get why a non-puzzle game would have so many hard... oh, wait. That's why. Now it makes sense. They wanted to sell a bunch of guidebooks and cash in on people who couldn't get past this game's challenging stumping puzzles. Now it makes sense. Konami gets an A+ for greed here. But being serious, a lot of the puzzles really just hurt the game more than anything, as they'd bring the game to a screeching halt and pause any momentum or suspense the game had started to build up, in addition to taking away from the horror elements. Like, how am I supposed to enjoy the horror elements and story when I spend 45 minutes twiddling around with a little puzzle box? Needless to say, online tutorials save my butt in this category. I think what this game should have done is what Spicy Horse did with Alice Madness Returns with puzzles. 1. Don't make them too hard, or 2. Make an option to just skip them. I think McGee realized that people weren't buying his game to solve puzzles, so an option was added to that game to just skip them, although a reward would be withheld from you if you chose that option, but at least you'd be allowed to progress and enjoy the main selling points of the game. So yeah, tough puzzles did not help this game one bit. With all of this discussed, was Silent Hill Homecoming really that bad? No, but it's not a good game either. Just a decent game, and I think my $20 could have been better spent elsewhere. So, with the mix of good horror elements, annoying puzzles, glitchy performance, a mess story, good bosses, but awful normal combat, I give Silent Hill Homecoming a 6.9 out of 10 by my grade scale. But, with this being said, at least on Xbox, the game does get discounts to less than $5 every now and then, a price well worth paying, so definitely wait for a sale before you buy. Some other horror games you might like if you enjoyed this title would be Alice Madness Returns or Ubisoft Zombi, which sadly only saw a physical release in Europe and the Steam port is literally unplayable. But if you live in Europe, see if you can find a used copy. I mean, the Wii U version is easy to find, but I heard it's not as good as the Xbox version. Anyways, y'all, this is my first ever Silent Hill review. Maybe in a few weeks I'll start playing Silent Hill 3 for a review. I've heard it's considered a better game. But let me know your thoughts in the comments and why you agree or disagree with me, and if you think this is a good, bad, or meh game. Thanks for watching. For anyone new to my channel, I mostly play, review, and discuss zombie and horror games, so feel free to check out some of my other content if that maybe sounds interesting. Always remember that God loves you all very much. Have a blessed day. Peace.